Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on taking action to transform. We're going to give it a minute or so for anyone to still join the meeting. But in the meantime, we'll slowly get going and I'll briefly explain to you what it is that we're actually going to cover today. And so in the title at the bottom of the screen, you can see what we're actually going to cover. So it says be, do, have. Setting up your life based on your primary need. And that really relates back to the session that Jana covered on Monday. And if you've seen that session, then you're going to understand what I'm talking about. If you haven't, don't worry, I highly recommend you go back and watch it. And that you'll also actually do the exercise that Jana posted in the platform at the end of the session, because we're going to slowly break down part of what comes after that session. And just to give you a quick reminder, Jana covered on Monday last week the 6 basic human needs. And those are, whether we're aware of it or not, fundamental to a lot of the behaviors we have and we display. And they're fundamental to many of the belief systems that we have as well. So let me break them down for you to give you a bit of a reminder if you've gone over them, and to quickly give you an understanding of the 6 if you haven't gone through the session yet. So we have significance, right, which is all about having a certain amount of stability in our lives, right, to know what's coming, what's going to happen. Then we have uncertainty as well, which is not necessarily the opposite of certainty, but it is that drive for variety in our lives, right? A bit of excitement. We have significance, which is not just superficial striving for likes on Facebook and Instagram, right? It's more significant in a sense of being acknowledged and having a sense of that you matter in general in life. Then we have growth, and growth is all about personal development, focusing on yourself and making sure that you grow as a person, that you develop yourself. We had love and connection, which speaks for itself. It's all about the relationships we build with other people. And the last one is contribution. What do you do? What do you add in life other than yourself, right? How do you contribute to the lives of others or a cause that you believe strongly in? So those are the 6 needs that Jana covered, and that strongly relates to the B section in the general title of this session and the general tool, let's say, that we're going to cover. And that's all about who do you want to be? What type of person do you want to be in life in general? And a lot of that starts with understanding yourself, because from that point you can work towards becoming that person, right? And that is all about the do part, which is the action part that we're going to focus on. So be, do, have is something that we follow in life as much as we can as a, let's say, 3-step process. Though many of us, without knowing, follow those same steps, but in a different order. If you think about that in your own life, you can maybe relate to that as well. So many of us focus instead on do, have, be. If we give that a clear example, for example, I need to do something, which is work hard so that I can have money, status, recognition in order to be happy, for example. Right? That's a very common process, a very common order that we see as something that makes sense. And for a lot of people, it doesn't really occur to them that you can change that order as well, that instead of having being happy, as an example, as the end result, to see that as your starting point, that you can be happy if that is your goal. And through that state that you're then in, you can focus on doing something that you love with a lot more energy and passion in order to have something else, right? To have your end result, because that thing, in a sense, that you initially saw as the end goal, being happy, can be your starting point. You can strive for something greater than yourself, something greater than that. Right? So that is the order of the two in general that we're going through in life. And Jana covered the B part, or at least by explaining the needs to give you more understanding of that, it makes it easier to focus on that B part, to know who and what you are, what type of person you want to be. And today we're going into the do, which is all about taking those action steps to actually work towards becoming that person. Now, we're going to do that with one specific example of those 6 human needs that Jana covered. And we're going to pick growth as an example. We're going to break that down. So we're going to go through what I'll show you on the slides in a minute, and we'll go through each of those sections and I'll break it down for you, because one of the things that we often do is we read something or we go over it, we absorb it, but we don't actually actively and consciously process it, right? So we read it, but how much actually sticks with us, because we don't break it down, we don't analyze it, we don't go in depth in it. And that is what we're going to do here. We're going to together break it down and see how you can apply it to your life, which questions you can ask, and more importantly with that, which steps you can take that are actionable for you to work towards becoming the person that you want to be, to have the life you want to have. So we'll do that with growth as an example. We're only going to have 2 slides, so they'll be on screen for quite a while as we go through the topics. So feel free to read through what's on the slide at your leisure. Don't worry about going too much in depth there, because we'll break it down together. Here's the first part that we'll cover, because it's broken down into 3 categories. We have your beliefs initially, which you see on the screen now. Then we'll have character as well, which goes a lot more into your characteristics as a person. And on the next slide, we'll have growth and balance. So that is essentially where everything we cover up until that point comes together. It all falls into place. So you'll notice when you go along that the topics that we cover, the things that we go over, keep that in mind and see how that falls together at the end part. Right, let me quickly have a look what's coming up in the chat. Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's go into beliefs, right? And before we do that, as a reminder, if you've done this test yourself, if you have your own outcome, then by all means, feel free to follow along and break this down in the same order, only with your own specific needs, right? Because that will, of course, apply more to you in that case. So in this example, of the 6 human needs, we'll consider that growth is your primary human need, right? So you have all 6 of them to an extent, but 2 are more dominant in your life in general. And we'll consider growth as the primary one. So when we look at the belief, and I'll just read it out for you so we can then go through the rest of it. Yes, so one question came in. Do you mean the 2 major with the specific needs? Yes, so there are the 6 needs that we all have, right? Certainty, uncertainty, significance, growth, love, contribution, love, connection, and contribution. And 2 of these are more present in your life. They're more dominant. So these are the ones, all 6 shape you as a person. But the 2 that are most dominant for you are the ones that come across most strongly, and they shape your beliefs and the way you are more prominently than the other 4. So I hope that makes sense. So if we go into the belief, for growth in general, if that's your primary need, that could be, I need to constantly develop new skills, learn new things, and improve at what I already know. I have to develop myself physically, emotionally, intellectually, and or spiritually. I need to be constantly growing. Right? So that is the general belief that you most likely have when growth, personal development, is your primary basic human needs from the 6. So keep that belief in mind in general, because that is what everything else, what a lot of your behavior and characteristics are based on. And with that belief, one of the main things to ask yourself is how this belief serves me. And when you ask that to yourself, I have this belief based on a need. How does this belief serve me in life? And if we go through that, it says there's always a new challenge and something new to learn. I'm not dependent on others in order to find joy in learning. I'm self-sufficient and active in my pursuits. I'm not attached to material possessions. It's not about what I have. It's about what I know and what I'm able to do. And that description is not necessarily the main thing. It's the question, it's the topic of that. How does this belief serve you? Because in this case, it's focused on the belief. But you can ask that question, and I encourage, maybe even challenge you to ask that question a lot more often in life in general. Right? When this comes up, when we go through this, we'll ask it a couple of times as well with other points than belief, right? Because everything you do serves you in one way or another. So this clearly shows how that belief that you have when it comes to personal growth, how that benefits you, how that serves you as a person as you go through life. And because we're now focusing on growth, but let's say that there are 2 primary needs, you have 6. And because 2 of them are more prominent in your life, not all of them have the same significance for you. They don't mean as much to you as the 2 main ones do. So if you would take 6 and divide that equally in percentages, the 2 primary ones are going to be with a higher percentage, which means by definition, some of the other ones are going to have a lower percentage. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you neglect those others. It just means that they're less prominent in your life. But that does mean that since you have a stronger focus on 2 specific points, the other ones are going to lack the same amount of attention and energy you give them, which means that there's a very good chance that certain principles in the lower categories for you are things that you might have lost sight of. And that is really where the 3rd point comes in. And that is where we can really start looking at those self-evaluating steps as an action to take for yourself on how you live your life and how you want to continue living your life, what you want to move towards. So if we look at the principle you lost sight of, that says connection and giving to others can be more fulfilling than acquiring new knowledge and skills. There can be more pleasure in sharing than in accumulating knowledge. And that is maybe the core of one of the things we're covering today. It is it can be such a confronting thing for you to realize that my primary need is growth, that doesn't mean you don't love other people. That doesn't mean you don't care about connecting with others and the relationships you have. It just means that growth as a need is the main thing that you focus on. But because of that, and if we take this to a more extreme, it can mean that you're so focused on acquiring knowledge, turning that into wisdom, focusing on growing yourself as a person, and focusing on that mental collecting of knowledge, that you might actually lose sight of the connections you have with people, right? And again, it doesn't mean you don't care about it, but it means that you're so absorbed in your own world of growth that you lose sight of the people you care about and that you want to spend time with. But that's often something that we're not aware of, right? That's why it's something that you've lost sight of. It's something that's important to us, but we don't pay the attention to that we want. And the question then here is, when you evaluate this for yourself, what are you going to do about it? To what extent does this apply to you? To what extent do you recognize this in yourself, that you indeed do not spend the time and energy on connecting with others, not to the extent that you want, because of your focus on growth, as an example? To what extent do you feel that that applies to you as well? And how do you feel about that, essentially? And then most importantly, what do you want to do with that? Because it's, to such a large extent, it's about balance, right? How do you want to change your life to the point that you feel, yes, I might focus most on growth, but I do feel that I have a healthy balance in my life, with, to the degree that I also spend time with others. So ask yourself that question. Is this something that you can identify with, no matter how confronting or painful it might be? But then ask yourself the more important question, now what? What am I going to do to change this, to have a more balanced way of living that I want to have with that connection with other people? Right? Let me quickly dive into the chat to see what's coming up there. So the question is, but when growth fulfills me, do I still need the huge amount of connection? And that's a very interesting one, because fulfillment is an unbelievably important thing, right? We can spend sessions on that in itself. Fulfillment is often seen as a more, a greater goal to strive towards than happiness, right? Because happiness can be rather fleeting. It can depend on the moment and the situation. But to have fulfillment, that is something much deeper. So if growth in itself is something that fulfills you, that's great. That's definitely something that I would say, stick with that. But there's no denying the fact that we are social beings, right? That we all strive for that relationship and that connection. And of course, we all have that desire to a different degree, but we do all have that desire. So it really comes down to focusing on yourself and saying, have I been paying less attention to those connections than I actually want, but I wasn't aware of it? And if that's the case, then ask yourself that question, what can I do to balance that and to make sure that it's up to the level that I want it, so that you don't only focus on that growth? I hope that answers the question that came up in the chat. If not, let me know and I'll go deeper into it. Because that principle that you've lost sight of, right, that has a consequence. And if we take this as growth, we continue in this example, that I can be seen as reserved and unwilling to share. I can become detached and overly private. I tend to undervalue relationships. And that is really where that confronting part comes in, right? If you are someone who has growth as that main need, to what extent do you see yourself in this? And that is about being just sometimes painfully honest with yourself. When you look at your own life, how do you see yourself? Can you imagine that people might see you as reserved or unwilling to share or detached? Do you undervalue relationships purely because you haven't given it any thought up until this point? Right? That is such a critical thing that you went through with Jana as well, that awareness of those needs, and now diving deeper into it, understanding, is this what it means? Is this what it means to me? Do I recognize myself in this behavior? And again, if that's the case, to what extent are you willing to change it to move to become the more balanced person that you want to be? Right? So you can see with the beliefs how this forms you to an extent based on one of these strong needs that you have. And then you can turn that last question of the consequences around and bring it back to, how does this serve me? Right? So you have that, you know the consequences of the principle that you lost sight of, those connections with others. And then ask yourself, how will it serve me to change that? To change it into a way that I want, how will that serve me? And that is a question, of course, only you can answer for yourself, but it's definitely a question that I encourage you to ask, especially on this point and with some others that are coming up as well. Because thinking about that, letting that sink in and going through it, even in your head, speaking it out loud or writing it down, they all have their own strengths. But going through that can really cause a strong shift in your life in terms of where you want to go and how you want to get there. So let me pause there for a moment, because I've been talking quite a lot, I've been sharing a lot, and I just want to check how this resonates with you so far. Does this make sense? So you can either drop something in the chat or just give me a simple thumbs up if everything makes sense, and we'll move on. But if there are any questions, by all means, let me know. Yes, it is lots to take in, and that is actually exactly the point. So in that sense, I'm actually glad that you come with this comment, because this is all about breaking it down, right? Normally, if you would get a text like this based on a test result, what would we do? Vast majority of people would read it and you'd probably say, yeah, I understand that. I get that. I recognize myself in this, not so much in this. And that's it. And you would go on, you would read on, and most of the actual content would be lost on you. And that's not a bad thing on you. That's just how we tend to do it. We don't give ourselves that time. We don't allow ourselves that opportunity to really analyze what we're reading when it comes to ourselves in this case, to really break it down and see, how does this apply to me? I'm reading about myself in a sense. Now, what am I actually reading? How do I see myself in this? Am I okay with what I see? And then take that step and saying, what am I going to do to change that? So yes, it's definitely a lot to take in. And that is the whole point, to take it in. What would you tell me is the best thing to find the right action for me? What would you tell me is the best thing to find out the right action? So the right action here is, I would say, to really evaluate this, to be critical on yourself. And with these points, as simple as it sounds, it comes down to decisions, right? To making a decision that once you've analyze this, once you come to the point that you can say, this is what I like, this is what I don't, this is what I like to change about it, then it's all about that decision. What do I want to change? Because when you know that, then you can move into the how am I going to change it. But before you look into the how, you need to know what it is that you want to change. And to know what you want to change, you first need to understand where you are. Because only then can you decide whether you are satisfied with your starting point or not, to then determine the next point you want to go to, and then decide how you're going to get there. So I hope these 3 points make sense, and that answers your question of which action to take. Okay, let me quickly open the door because I need to let a cat out of the room. There we go. We always have to make sure that the cat, who technically owns the house, right, is always at ease. So probably he won't be back until the end of the session. Okay, so that was the part on beliefs, and I saw a thumbs up just a minute ago. So I'm glad to see that this all resonates, that it makes sense, because with that, we're moving into character. And with character, it's a lot about who we are as a person. There's not that much that we're actually going to analyze here. What we'll analyze is actually on the next page. But there are some interesting points here that you can go over at your own leisure, right? And if you want to read them now, you can. Again, I would highly recommend take the test if you haven't done it, because there you can find it for growth, but for all the other areas as well, right? So character is where we would look at your focus. So I focus on learning, studying, and developing my skills and being the best I could possibly be. That is an excellent thing to strive for. And that is what you focus on. By all means, go for it. A question to keep in mind is what you had to an extent with the beliefs, right? Is there anything you've lost sight of? Is because of that focus, is there anything that you might have been neglecting? Always see if you can ask yourself those challenging, confronting, and probing questions. Like, if this is what I'm doing, is there anything that I'm missing out on? Because there is something you're missing out on. There is something you're not focusing on because your focus is on learning. And that's fine, right? It doesn't have to be a bad thing as long as you're aware of it, because then you can decide, am I okay with this or not? Same with energy. I conserve my energy and focus away from feelings in order to learn everything there is to be learned. That's an extreme example, right? I focus away from feelings. That's not the same level for everyone. To what extent do you want to focus on feelings? Because theory is only one part of the equation, right? Feelings is an important part as well. So ask yourself again, to what extent do I recognize myself in this? And am I okay with that? If yes, great, keep it up. If not, where do you want to go? How do you want to change that? And then you can find out what you're actually going to do to make those changes. And that is essentially all up to you, right? To decide how you want to slowly, step by step, move towards that more balanced version of yourself. Health speaks for itself, right? We're going to skip that. But you avoid can be an interesting one to look into as well. I'll do anything to avoid feeling inadequate or drained. I avoid demands and intrusion on the privacy that allows me to focus on my own personal growth. An excellent thing to actually focus on, because it's because of that focus you have that you avoid that intrusion and you avoid feeling inadequate and drained. Question is, what's the price of that? Right? again, such a probing question. What's the price of avoiding feeling inadequate and drained? What do you need to do to keep that focus? And that's, again, an answer only you can give, as long as you ask yourself that tough question. And it only works if you're honest with yourself in the answer. So think about that as a question as well. Strength, there's nothing to say about that, right? Strengths are strengths. They're a good point about yourself. Read them, see if you recognize yourself in them, and see them as a positive thing about you, right? Not every strength is seen by the same person as the same thing. Not everyone sees them as a strength, but they are, like, I'm respectful of others. No one can be bothered by that. No one can see that as a negative thing, right? I'm thoughtful, calm, dependable. I like to think that I'm a model of self-improvement to others. Maybe that sounds a bit tooting your own horn, let's say, but it is something that you can only achieve when you focus on the self-improvement. And if that is something that can help others be inspired by, why not go for that, right? But with all these points, ask yourself, to what extent do I recognize myself in this? And is this where I want to be? Is this the type of person I want to be? Then here we go into the last 2 points that are really the ones I wanted to dive into, right? Because your communication style, that is definitely something that you can work on. That's a skill that you can develop. This might be your primary style, but communication is something that you can really work on and develop. Stress is a topic on its own and can again cover multiple sessions, so we're not going to really go into this. It's really an important point to focus on finding your stressors, right? Here, if it would say, I'm stressed when I feel tired or dependent on others, know that about yourself. And the other needs have different stress triggers. So it's good to read through those and to know which stress triggers do you have? How can you minimize those to, again, be a more balanced person that you want to be? All these steps are concrete actions that you can take, or they can turn into concrete actions that you can take to transform your life, transform yourself into the version that you really want to be. And to really see that for this session as your goal to get out of it. Which action steps do I want to take once you've gone through all of this? The 2 main ones, though, that I really wanted to get into when it comes to character are defensiveness and emotions, because they go very much hand in hand. And if we read that, I become defensive when there are intrusions or limitations on what I want to do. I can become angry when people interfere with my need for privacy. Now, to an extent, I think most of us can understand that. Most of us can get that. And to a point, we can relate to that. No one likes intrusion, because intrusion, by definition, is something that has a negative connotation. Interference is the same, right? It has a negative connotation. Nobody likes to be interfered with in any way. But we also know that being defensive in itself is not a very productive thing, right? We only get defensive when we feel attacked in a way. And that comes down a lot to how you interpret something. And when there's an intrusion on what I want to do, that's a fair point. But which question could you ask yourself with that? Right? Think about that for a moment. When someone says, you're intruding on my privacy, you're limiting my privacy, that is up to you to decide how you would define intrusion and limitation. But a lot of it comes down to how you look at that, right? Someone might limit your privacy, but if your definition of that is that you spend 7 hours a day being on yourself, focusing on things you do in private, and someone takes half an hour of that to chat with you, is that an issue? Right? Who is that person? What is that conversation that they want to have about? Is that maybe the point where you can link it back to the principle you've lost sight of, that human connection, that connection with other people? Right? So defensiveness is really something I wanted to touch on, because that defensiveness can change, that can go down depending on how you evaluate yourself as a person, where you are, and how you want to change. Right? Maybe you realize, okay, I do want to spend more time with others. I want to improve those connections. Then that means spending more time and energy with other people, which automatically means that you yourself are shifting your time allocation, let's say, from privacy to other people. So you're changing that balance for yourself, whereas previously you might felt defensive when someone wanted some of that private time from you. Now you're deliberately allocating it to other people yourself, because you feel that you want to be a more balanced human being in terms of privacy and connecting with others, right? So that connection is such an important part with you evaluating where defensiveness for you comes in. Does that make sense so far? Let's pause again for a moment to see if that makes sense. Because I know we're covering a lot, and I know it goes maybe deeper than you might have been used to, right? Then you might not go that deep yourself into things. But that is, again, the important point. And I'm glad I'm getting a thumbs up, so someone is following along. Hopefully you're applying this to an extent to yourself as well, right? If you haven't, do that afterwards. I highly recommend it, because that's where you can make such progress. So that's on defensiveness, right? That's the last one of the character part that I wanted to cover. And as I said at the beginning, growth and balance is where it all comes together. That is where you'll see essentially a summary of everything I've been telling you, all put together in the future you essentially that you want to be, given that growth is your primary human need. So let's look at that. Your goal could be to be able to pursue my growth, still focusing on that growth part, while enjoying relationships and connections with people, right? So that is really where that balance comes in, where you really want to focus on keep doing my own thing, but at the same time, making sure that you don't lose sight of that connection with people. I need to be able to experience joy and pleasure in many ways, not just by learning. So that is actually a very nice link back to one of the questions that came in. What if learning and growing fulfills me? Awesome, excellent. By all means, keep doing that, because fulfillment is one of the ultimate things to strive for. But it does also mean that joy and pleasure and fulfillment does not only have to come through growth, right? There are other parts of life. And when you have a healthy balance in that, and you know that you can find, and you experience that you can find more fulfillment and more joy through different parts of your life, then that makes it a lot more balanced, right? It makes it more diverse in a way as well. It's a similar example that everyone knows, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. If the basket goes bust, you lose all your eggs. Same with this. If you focus solely on growth, and for whichever reason that falls away or is limited extensively, then you lose so much. If you have it more balanced, more spread out, and you're focused on connection with others as well, and that brings you a huge chunk of your joy and fulfillment, then if one of the two falls away, you still have a lot left. And so don't see it as a safety precaution, but more as being able to get your joy and your fulfillment from different areas of life. So that might be an excellent goal, and you can focus on your own primary need and think about the goal that you want to have for yourself based on that knowledge you have of your needs. Then what to do? What can you practically do to get there? I need to find balance in life by focusing more on others rather than on my own growth and development. Now, that is the actionable part, right? That is, you know what you want to do. Then how are you going to do that? And you'll realize that often, whatever it is you do, it's going to be those small incremental steps that you do on a daily basis that moves you towards that. It's not rocket science with this. You can say, I've been studying for 4 hours. Why not take that last hour and do something with other people? Don't need to study for 5 hours if you want to move towards that balance. So it's these small things that you can do. They're not complicated, but they can have a huge impact on your life in general. I need to experience pleasure in giving, to be less reserved and give priority to love and relationships. I need to take better care of those I love. A lot of that speaks for itself, right? When you focus on giving on others instead of being absorbed with your growth, then that can create a whole well of joy and fulfillment and balance in your life that you up to that point might not even have been aware of, that it could be something important like that to tap into. Give priority to love and relationships. That doesn't necessarily mean romantic love, right? Love in general, family, friends, any type of relationships that you can think of, colleagues. It is all about that, again, that balance that you can focus on, allocating different time and energy away from growth to love and relationship, to people, to connection. That is really the aim of this analysis that we're doing, the self-evaluation. What do I want? Which steps can I take to get there? That's the action to focus on. And then, which we always have, right? There's always a barrier somewhere. There's always an obstacle. What interferes with your goal? And that is maybe the hardest one to focus on, right? Because it can be a confronting one. If this is your case, I believe that I am not worthy if I don't constantly improve myself. The importance that I give to privacy interferes with my goal. I need to recognize that I can appear self-centered. It can be that your desire to focus on growth comes from a deep-rooted insecurity, or that deep desire to feel worthy, right? And if that is the case, that is good to know, to analyze for yourself, so you can focus on that. And if you then realize that the importance I give to privacy interferes with the goal you've set before, that is a huge realization for yourself to have, and to know that this is something that's blocking me from reaching that goal. And then that can be a huge trigger for you to actually work on that, to make those changes. And the last one to cover might be a lot more important than you think. We have this tendency to really be going at it on our own. We feel that when I achieve something on my own, then it's valuable, then it's worthy. I don't want to accept help from others because that means weakness, right? But accepting support, not even asking for it necessarily, but accepting support can be a huge show of strength, because it means that you know and recognize where your pitfalls are, what your vulnerabilities are. And when you accept that help that is being offered, that support, that can be huge in your relationship building with others, the result you can get out of it, and just how you feel about yourself in general, right? So here it says, others can appreciate my ability to be self-sufficient and independent, as well as my willingness to live and let live. while at the same time encouraging me to be more social and loving. How is that for a great support system that you have, right? If people recognize your qualities, they acknowledge that in you, yet at the same time, they encourage you to move towards a more balanced version of yourself in a way that works for you. So that support from others is so powerful in reaching the goals you want. So all of this together really comes down to looking at this for yourself. Again, if you haven't done the test, highly recommend doing it because it will give you a clear overview which of the two needs are more prominent for you. Then you can go over this and you can apply the same critical thinking and analysis as we've done now with growth as an example to your own category, to your own need, and really break that down. Give it 30 minutes or an hour and write it down. Think about, how does this apply to me? How do I recognize myself in this? And what is it that I want to move towards? What in the end is your goal? What is the thing that you want to move towards? How are you going to do that? What is interfering with it? And which people in your life can support you, and how can they support you with that? And when you do that, when you take the time to break this down for yourself and to focus on that, to make this a priority in a sense, you will likely be confronted in a way with who you are and how you might not be as balanced as you want to be. But that is a good thing. That is the beauty of it, because when you know that starting point, you can determine where you want to go and you can determine how you're going to get there. So again, go over this yourself. It can be unbelievably valuable in the results that it can give you in the short term, but also in the long run, right? So we've come to the end of it. Again, I know it's been a lot. Let me know how this makes sense, how this resonates with you. Let me know if there are any questions that you still want to go over. I'm more than happy to go through it with you. If not, just give me a thumbs up and we'll call it a day, because it has been a lot of information. Let it sink in, process it, go over it yourself for whichever category and need applies to you, and make the most of it, right? If you have any questions on it, you can always let us know. We'll make the time to look into it with you if that's what you want, and use this as a tool to move towards the version of yourself that you want to be. So that's it for today. I hope it has been useful and insightful. I wish you all a lovely evening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.